Good morning, good morning, good morning. And thank you so much for joining us for today's panel on human trafficking. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and today we've assembled an excellent panel who will talk with us so that we all learn and grow in our knowledge about human trafficking. I want to give just another minute for other people to be able to log on before we begin. But in the meantime, I want to let you know that we have materials that we will be sharing with you via email at the conclusion of today's event. The information will help you learn and gain more knowledge about human trafficking and will provide resources that you can share with others. Thank you. All right. I think we've waited for others to join. Um, I wanted to take some time to introduce you to our panel of experts today. With us, we have Ms. Bianca Jackson. Please wave, Bianca. Bianca serves as the Chief Executive Officer of New Friends, New Life, a nonprofit agency in Dallas that restores and empowers women and girls who have been trafficked or exploited. She joined New Friends, New Life in August 2018 as the Chief Development Officer until her recent appointment as CEO. As CEO, Bianca leads the strategic development and financial operations, as well as the organization's programs and initiatives. Thank you, Bianca, for joining us today. We also have Noel Mendoza. Give us a wave, Noel. Noel is the Human Trafficking Outreach Program Coordinator at Mosaic Family Services and has been engaged in communities serving youth, families, and professionals for more than 11 years throughout North Texas. He's witnessed the complexities of human trafficking, and it is a priority of his to ensure that people receive a comprehensive understanding of the problem and of the profound impact human trafficking has on the lives of victims and survivors. Ashley, good morning, Ashley. Ashley Fay is the Development Director of Refugee Services of Texas. Before her recent move to Texas, Ashley served as Development Director at a global health nonprofit organization in Phoenix. And since 2006, she's worked with refugees, trafficking survivors, system-involved youth, and adults in indigenous communities in a variety of programmatic and development roles. Ashley believes strongly in the power of mission-centered organizations who value authentic relationships with all of its stakeholders and putting clients first. Thank you, Ashley. And finally, we have Bradley. Good morning, Bradley. Bradley Hudson is currently an assistant special agent in charge assigned to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security Investigations in Dallas, Texas. In this position, Mr. Hudson is responsible for the supervision and oversight of the HSI Dallas-led North Texas Trafficking Task Force, narcotics, financial gangs, and the Tyler office, which covers 22 counties in East Texas. Bradley is a busy person. Prior to this assignment, Mr. Hudson supervised investigations involving financial crimes, counterproliferation, human smuggling, narcotics trafficking, child exploitation, worksite enforcement, and asset forfeiture. Welcome. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining. I want to take the opportunity to just begin today's discussion by helping people understand the sense of urgency around the topic. In order to do that, I felt it was appropriate to begin with data on human trafficking in the US. According to a national survey and national data from the Human Trafficking Hotline, in 2019, there were over 22,000 trafficking victims and survivors, 11,000 situations of human trafficking, 4,300 traffickers, and over 1,900 suspicious businesses reported across the US. Ryan and Ashley, I'm sorry, Bradley and Ashley, how do we put this data in context for Texas and for the North Texas DFW metro area?
Brad, you want to go first?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Latoya, as you stated, the statistics are actually staggering. But as you look at the issue of trafficking, it's different than almost any other crime that you have. Drug traffickers, they bring drugs across into the United States. The drugs are handed off to somebody who actually sells the drugs, and it's almost like a one-time use. Whereas in a trafficking organization, the victim is continually victimized over and over. And when that organization gets through victimizing the person, then they sell the person to a different organization, and the circle and the trend just continues in the victimization. So what has Homeland Security actually done? We have prioritized in public safety, especially the human trafficking area, with our partners to include the United States Attorney and other external partners in the area. We have taken steps to immediately tackle the human trafficking problem. One of the steps we have taken as a lead agency is to focus on the North Texas Trafficking Task Force, which has a mission that emphasizes eradicating human trafficking by proactively investigating and prosecuting perpetrators and the people that facilitate their criminal activity. The task force is driven to rescue and protect victims, promote awareness, and prevent all forms of trafficking through a coordinated approach with our stakeholders in the private and public sectors. As a result, from October 2019 to October 2020, we have been very successful in that. We've arrested 17 people for human trafficking offenses. We've arrested an additional 62 other people on crimes linked to trafficking, such as firearm charges, drug charges, and money laundering. And in addition to that, we have also provided services to 38 victims of trafficking. We conducted over 48 outreach presentations on trafficking and reached over 9,600 people with those presentations. One of the examples I'd like to talk about is one of our recent successes in the City X Guide website. It's a successor to the Backpage webpage, and it markets and advertises trafficking. So we got the lead, we started investigating it, and at the end of the day, we were able to seize and shut down the website. We arrested the person who was operating the website, and we seized over 8.4 million in proceeds that the person obtained from advertising the trafficking website. So we are truly going forward to eradicate this horrendous problem that we have in the Dallas Metroplex.
And as far as Refugee Services of Texas is concerned, we operate a program called the Survivors of Trafficking Empowerment Program, or STEP, that provides direct services to victims of trafficking all throughout the state. So we, of course, serve refugees, but we also serve other displaced populations, and we have 6 sites, ranging from all the way down on the border in the Rio Grande Valley up to Amarillo, with sites as well in Dallas and Fort Worth. So Latoya, you gave some really great statistics at a high level. I thought I would narrow that down just a little bit. So according to a study by the University of Austin, we have an estimated 300,000 victims currently within Texas at any given time. And about 79,000 of those are minor sex trafficking victims. We know that traffickers are estimated to exploit nearly $600 million from victims annually, and that costs the state of Texas about $6.6 billion. That's from a report called Human Trafficking by the Numbers. So to give you an idea of what we do in our STEP program and what our clientele looks like, we assisted 398 victims last year. 70% of those were adults and 30% were minors. 21% were sex trafficking victims, 25% labor, and 9% were both. And 14% of those that we served were domestic minor sex trafficking victims. 78% were female and 22% were male. So one of the things that separates RST's program from many other programs is that we are able to serve all victims of trafficking, whether they're foreign-born or domestic, men, women, minors, sex trafficking, labor trafficking. So we really kind of run the spectrum.
And I thank you for showing the depth and breadth of the people who can become victims. A lot of times when people think of human trafficking, they focus in just on sex trafficking, which is a horrible crime in and of itself. But I really wanted everyone to be aware through today's panel that labor trafficking is a serious concern as well. And I think the data that you provided really highlighted that. How do people get recruited for labor trafficking? And what are some of the long-term impacts labor trafficking can have on victims? Brad or Noel, do you have information to respond?
Oh, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Latoya. And first of all, let me say thank you for this opportunity. I think it's great that the city of Dallas is doing something like this and bringing this topic to the forefront. We definitely need to have this discussion. And I'm very happy to do it with my esteemed colleagues here. When it comes to labor trafficking, that's such a great point that you highlight there. The study that Ashley was referring to at the University of Texas at Austin, she mentioned the 79,000 victims and survivors of sex trafficking. And as you mentioned, Latoya, that's something that we definitely have to continue to keep an eye on and monitor. But I would also point to the other 75%, 70 to 75% of that number. The other 220,000 in that study represented the potential number of labor trafficking victims here in Texas at any given time, right? So that's a staggering number, and that's why it's really important that we begin to talk about this. And when we think about who the labor trafficking victims are or how they get recruited, I think it's really important to understand something about traffickers first. Traffickers are experts at two things. They're experts at identifying vulnerabilities, and they are experts at exploiting those vulnerabilities. So whenever we're thinking about who's at risk, it can be anyone, right? We're humans, we all have vulnerabilities, but we also know that there are some communities and community members that are more vulnerable than others, right? In traffickers' behavior, we see that if they're willing to violate other labor rights, such as not paying minimum wage, maintaining hazardous conditions, other labor laws, they are also more likely to traffic folks and take that next step. When we think about where they are located, labor trafficking can happen in any industry, right? Texas has a huge agriculture industry in the North Texas area. We have a booming economy, restaurants, construction, landscaping. In all of these industries, there are going to be folks who are vulnerable because maybe they have a family that they need to provide for. They have a lack of opportunities. Maybe they're not aware of the labor rights that they have. These folks are targeted by traffickers and then are coerced or manipulated to stay in situations that are not beneficial for themselves, right? So it's important that whenever we are looking at risk factors, whenever we look at the Polaris project, which is the human trafficking, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, whenever we look at risk factors pertaining to the reports that they've gotten, recent migration and relocation is one of the top risk factors that is shown for labor trafficking victims. The next one there is unstable housing and criminal record, criminal history. Now, what is important there when it comes to recent migration and relocation, there's a common misconception that all foreign nationals who have been trafficked are undocumented folks. And that's not the case. Whenever we look at reality, many of these folks do come in legally, come in through systems such as the H-2A systems, but they're made to overstay those visas. And then that same system is used against them as a form of control, right? I say all of that just to point out the complexity of these cases. I'm sure Brad could speak to how difficult it is to identify labor trafficking cases, report, investigate, and prosecute. Is because it involves all these subtle means of control that are not so obvious to anyone who may be passing a restaurant or may look in the back of a kitchen or looking at a construction site, right? They're not so readily available. It takes a proactive approach to be able to look at context thoroughly and try to figure out where those vulnerabilities lay and who are those vulnerable populations that could be taken advantage of.
So, Brad, would you have additional information to share?
Absolutely. I agree with everything you said. Trafficking is a $1 billion a year industry. And that's the only reason people are involved in trafficking, and that's to make money. And so, and you're absolutely right. When people think of trafficking, they often think of sex trafficking, but labor trafficking is an equally terrible crime. Labor trafficking victims are often recruited and enticed by a promise of a better job or better life. But when they arrive in the United States, they often find themselves in a living nightmare. The long-term effect of labor trafficking is often being held as a slave with what often becomes a moving goalpost as their captors move that goalpost to pay off transportation costs to the United States. Their captures provide the victims with constant fear of harm or threats of going to the police or even having the person sent back to their host country. This often causes a longer period of victimization, and that's what we often see. Because of this, it creates a very difficult situation for law enforcement as these victims are constantly told by their captors that law enforcement will not help them. They often will not believe them, and they only want to deport them back to their host country. This creation of a false fear of law enforcement leads to even further victimization. This is why Homeland Security Investigations has taken a victim-centered approach. And by using our victim witness coordinators, that allows us to build trust with the victim while also building our criminal case so that we can successfully stop the trafficking that we see.
Latoya, how fitting it is. I would just like to say how fitting it is that it is the Office of Equity and Inclusion that's putting on this this event today, because that's exactly what we need in order to be able to provide protective factors for those folks who are most vulnerable. Right? We need to understand the communities in our area, understand them to a point where we're able to be sensible to the needs that they may have, the vulnerabilities that they may present, and the strengths that they have to give back to our great city here in Dallas. So I just wanted to highlight what a great opportunity it is to work with your office.
Thank you. Thank you. And it'll turn into a love fest, as I say. It's so awesome to have the opportunity to work with all of you, partner with all of you, and to glean the knowledge from you all today. And because most people think specifically about sex trafficking, it is the thing that's front and center in most people's minds related to human trafficking. I do want to turn the conversation away from labor trafficking, which is where the majority of the victims statistically lie. And it's across the spectrum, male, female, young, old. It's not tied to any one race or ethnic group. We find people from across our community who can fall victim. And the two most important things I want them to take away from what y'all just shared is, number one, law enforcement is there to help. And you all are concerned, and we are all concerned about making sure that they are no longer victimized. And number two, to understand that this is an issue that can happen to anyone. And so I thank y'all for highlighting that. When we transition over to sex trafficking, which is what typically comes to mind when we think about trafficking victims, that we know that there are escort services and illicit businesses and pornography, which are common ways that people are victimized in sex trafficking. There are also some apps and some online sites that have become major recruiting grounds recently. I just want to have y'all share who was most likely to become a sex trafficking victim based on your experience, based on the data, based on the clients that you all have served. Bianca and Ashley, would you all like to share?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this panel today. At New Friends, New Life, we serve survivors of sex trafficking, women and girls who have been trafficked or exploited. And I think that's such a very important question. Who is vulnerable for this? Because as the saying goes, what you misdiagnose, you will mistreat, right? So if we are not correctly identifying who's being affected, then we're going to miss the solution to this problem. And as you mentioned, Latoya, there is a focus on sex trafficking, which is so important. But the challenge that we're seeing is that there's still misconceptions around how sex trafficking even happens. So we are focusing on it, but people are expecting that someone is going to show up in a white van and kidnap someone out of a parking lot. And if that's how you're misdiagnosing how sex trafficking happens, you're going to miss what's happening. So in reality, what we're seeing at New Friends to Life and locally and across the state and even the country, right now, the average age of a sex trafficking victim is between 13 and 15 years old. And so there are vulnerabilities that make her more susceptible to becoming a victim. And those are very basic things that we all have need for love and affection, for attention, for protection, for financial security. So he's showing up as someone who's going to meet a very real need in her life. And it's important that we create systems and programs that help to fortify her against that. So some of the risk factors for a teen girl in particular may be if she's a multiple time runaway, if she's run away from home multiple times, if there is childhood abuse in her background, if childhood sexual abuse in particular, if there is domestic violence, if she comes from a background of poverty or financial instability, then when he shows up, as Noel mentioned, traffickers are experts at identifying what your vulnerability is and then exploiting that. So he's going to show up and say, I can help you pay your mom's rent, or no, your parents don't understand you. You're so beautiful. I can take care of you. So those socioeconomic issues and those emotional needs that we have, that as if you know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all want to feel loved, safe, and secure. We all need food, shelter, protection. He's exploiting those things. And so when we look at a typical victim, we're looking and helping to identify some of those red flags that make her susceptible to him showing up. And the scary part about that is it's just about every girl. Like, what 15-year-old doesn't have those needs? What adult woman doesn't want to feel valued and accepted? And so as we look back to the definition of how human trafficking happens, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, there's the force, fraud, or coercion. So those things are at play. Thankfully, if this person is a minor, force, fraud, and coercion don't need to be present. It's automatically child sex trafficking, and it's a crime. And that's a very good starting place for us to get her out of that trap. But when you take it away from what's sensationalized in the movies, that someone's going to show up in a van, our message in that case would just be like, hey, stay out of the parking lot at night and stay away from the shrubbery, walk on the other side of the street. But it is so much more complex than that. And so it's going to take all of us paying attention to those other needs that make her susceptible.
Absolutely, Bianca. I think you covered it really beautifully. What we see at RST, and I think because of the multiple populations that we serve, is recent migration and relocation is also a huge vulnerability factor. And so, especially right now, as we're seeing unaccompanied minors coming across the border, right, they're a prime suspect for traffickers of all kinds. So I think that's just kind of something to be aware of. Asylum seekers, same sorts of things. The force, fraud, and coercion is really important. We think of trafficking as handcuffs, right? Like you're chained up somewhere, and that's typically not the case. There's coercion, there's threats against your family, there's misinformation about deportation and using the system against you. And so many of our clients are coming from countries where there is corruption in the police force. That doesn't exist to that degree here, right? So we value our relationships with law enforcement so much, and we do a lot to educate our clients on what does the police force look like here. They are here to help. That's not their experience oftentimes in their home country. And so if a trafficker knows that, they can use that against the person as well. So definitely we see a lot of that among our foreign-born populations, but we see so many domestic clients as well. And I think it's really important for just the general population, including our kids, as is age appropriate, to understand what trafficking and exploitation is so that they can be aware of it too. So if a relationship seems a little sketchy, or there's a controlling factor, maybe it doesn't start out as trafficking in the beginning. My experience is that it doesn't. Usually it doesn't. They form a relationship, oftentimes in sex trafficking, with the victim, right? And so I think it's really important for them, for the young adults, to know what the red flags are. But to address the other part of your question, we see a lot of sex trafficking survivors coming from other illicit businesses, like you talked about, sometimes from nail salons or massage parlors, things like that. But in general, in all of my work, and I've worked with trafficking survivors both domestically and internationally, I think poverty and homelessness, that really cuts to the root of what makes someone vulnerable, and actually what makes a trafficker interested in going that route. People don't wake up one day and say, I want to be a trafficker, right? And there's no excuse for their behavior, absolutely not. But I see it stemming from poverty as well. So I think that we need to be really aware of that factor.
That's critically important because there are vulnerabilities that exist, not just financial. We talked about poverty being a potential vulnerability, but there are also vulnerabilities that exist based on emotional needs. And so that's important. Bianca, I want to take a moment to direct a question toward you, because you, in your original comment, talked about how the 13-year-old and teen girls are particularly susceptible to becoming victims. And you all held a discussion not long ago about what parents should look for or be on the lookout for to prevent their children from becoming victims. Can you just give us a few highlights from that discussion?
Sure, yes. Our clinical team has put together basically top 10 tips, or 10 tips that parents can look for when they're wanting to prevent or identify trafficking from happening to their child. And I think the core of it is to just stay engaged and be aware. So first, knowing that sex trafficking is happening and your child can be at risk. And then everything from there stems from there involves staying engaged, knowing what her conversations are like, particularly on her social media. It is okay to check your child's social media to show that level of engagement and commitment, because that's where he's looking for her. And once again, he's coming in subtly and going to provide all the compliments, and he's a friend. And so paying attention to your child's social media, noticing if they have older friends, if they're around an older crowd. So those are just some of the things. Opening the lines of communication between you and your child, as the parent to the child, knowing that, letting them know they can come to you with any concern or question, and that those lines of communication are there. Because if you can fill those needs, those very basic needs, those emotional needs, then the child won't be as vulnerable to the person who's going to come and present the idea of filling the need with very evil intent. So we have that sheet available, and we'll be able to share it in any of your post follow-up so that people can just have a resource to get them thinking about how to stay engaged in their child's communication and interactions.
And we thank you, thank you for sharing that information. I wanted to open it up to other panelists to see if there are other signs that you believe parents or community members should look out for to prevent trafficking, or ways that we can recognize signs of trafficking. And let us know what we should do if trafficking is suspected.
Latoya, I'll jump off on this question. Listen, I absolutely agree with what Bianca and the other panelists have said. People have a perception of what a bad guy looks like or a bad woman looks like. They think that they are going to look like somebody coming up to the van, or they're going to, peek in somebody's windows. These people are experts at what they do. I mean, they are experts at grooming. They're expert communicators. They can talk to kids. They can, and they seek out these vulnerable victims through the social media platforms. Don't be afraid to look at your children's social media accounts. Check their phones. If you don't know who somebody is, ask them, who is this person? The lack of communication is what we see in a lot of the victims. The parents feel like that it's an invasion of privacy to look at their social media accounts or check their phones. But it's very important that parents and adults become engaged. One thing that we see is that there are specific platforms that the traffickers and these specialists, is what I really call them, go after their victims. They like to use Snapchat. That's a favorite. They like to use Instagram. And one of the reasons they like to use these platforms is it's because of the direct messaging system that is embedded into these platforms. It's easy for the perpetrator to delete the messages on their side, and it instantly deletes the message on the victim side. By doing this, they prevent the adult from seeing the messages that are being communicated. This is very problematic on that. One thing in other signs that you can look for that we've noted, and since I've been doing this, is, be aware of your surroundings. If a person appears to be disconnected from family and friends, I mean that is truly a sign. If somebody is having bruises on different parts of their body that's unexplained, that that is another example. A person, this is a really good one, and when we sort of teach this in the transportation industry and the hospitality industry, if you see somebody who is controlling someone, they're often deferring and controlling the situation. They're controlling who this person talks to, what controlling their movement. This is truly a one of the signs that could be an indicator of trafficking. And as far as what you should do, if you suspect human trafficking, call your local law enforcement. Get a hold of one of the NGOs that advertise and promote and educate. You can always reach out to us. And I'm sure you'll be providing the pamphlets that has the information on there, but it's 866-347-2423. And you can also go on the internet to ice.gov/tips to provide this information. That information will go to the Human Trafficking Center, and then they distribute those leads nationally and internationally to all the Homeland Security investigations offices that investigate human trafficking.
Just to add to that a bit, I think if we're kind of staying on the vein of youth, if we're talking about some of the youth, it's important to maybe have a basic understanding of what some of the child labor laws are out there, right? Because if you have your son or daughter's friends is working from 7 p.m. till midnight, we understand that the child labor law says that that child should not be working until midnight on a school day, or they shouldn't be working during the school day at all if they're not in any kind of program that allows it. Also, they shouldn't be working in hazardous conditions. So if that child comes to your home and has a cast and says they fell out because they were working on a roof or something, not maybe that's not necessarily a trafficking situation, but that is an indicator. And if you're able to gain a little bit of context in that child's life, maybe they're living with a friend of the family that's not the direct family themselves, they kind of feel estranged, they're always at your house, those are all indicators that point to a possible trafficking situation, right? So what to do best there is, as Brad mentioned, is look for those resources that you have. And then in the general sense, when it comes to the community, whenever we think about labor trafficking situations, I go back to that employer that is not afraid of breaking any or violating any other labor rights that that person has, right? They don't care about the hazardous conditions that his employees are working around, right? They're not being paid what they're supposed to be paid. If you look at situations like that, and then you also see signs of malnourishment or exhaustion exhibited by the potential victim or survivor, you somehow learn that they have no access to their personal documents. They tell you that, yeah, the person is always threatening us with deportation or making jokes about deportation. Those little indicators, along with the contextual information that you're able to get, is what's going to be helpful, right? I don't know, Brad could expand a little bit on this, but if you are able to look at a situation, being able to get enough detail to share with that law enforcement partner is going to be crucial, right? We're not saying you should go in and investigate the matter. You shouldn't go in and look for who's the bad guy, any of that. But whatever superficial information that you could get based on what you're able to observe and provide that to the law enforcement partner, that's going to help them out. Or if it's if it is probably somebody comes out to you and is looking for services, looking for resources in the community that are able to provide these services that are trauma informed and that are victim centered and will not cause more harm than good.
I think not causing more harm is the most important thing for all of us to remember, because just because we see something, we don't have the knowledge and the expertise to really intervene appropriately. We're not law enforcement. We're concerned citizens. We're concerned about the welfare of that individual, but we really need to gain as much information as we can from the potential victim and help pass that information along to the proper authorities. And just in case anyone missed it, you can call in to report suspected trafficking at 1-866-347-2423 or by going to www.ice.gov/tips. Thank you so much, Brad, for sharing the information that you shared, Noel, for reminding us that there are different ways that trafficking happens again, and that we need to be mindful of how we can gather that information to be able to share. Ashley, did you have anything you wanted to share about what we should do?
Sure. So my suggestion would be the hotline number. We can put that in the chat as well, but it's 888-373-7888. I can put it in the chat. And there's so many signs, and you've talked about a lot of them already, so I don't want to be too redundant, but I would say that there's so many crimes that overlap with human trafficking, like labor violations, abuse, even substance abuse can sometimes be a red flag. And so we see trafficking victims often living in unsuitable living conditions, being denied basic necessities, including food and water. Some of the signs might be more straightforward to spot, so look for those. So you mentioned the bruising, Brad. That's one of the things that I thought about. If they appear to be coached on what to say, if they're always deferring to someone else, or if they appear to be controlled in any way. Also, I think, Bianca, you mentioned that if a juvenile is engaging in prostitution, they're automatically defined as a trafficking survivor, even if they say that they're a willing participant. So it's important to remember.
Yes, definitely. And for teens as well, if a teen girl is coming home with expensive, lavish gifts, that's another sign. It speaks to that grooming that's happening because, as everyone mentioned, he's going to show up correctly to begin with. That's the thing that lures her in. So if she has things that she can't afford, that's a sign that someone is feeding her something, and that's going to turn into a debt that she cannot pay and a cycle that she cannot get out of on her own.
It's so much. And I'm grateful that you all are here and you have this expertise, not only to share with us, but also with the participants. And most importantly, I want everyone to keep in mind that as we drop these resources in the boxes and provide ways that you can help, because you all have been working in this field so many years, I don't want to leave people without hope. And so one of the most important things that I would love for each of you to share is a success story, how you've been able to help a survivor of human trafficking. Because honestly, we want to identify the signs, we want to be on the lookout, we want to prevent it. But if we can't prevent it, we want to help people get out and help them understand that there's good on the other side. So can you share success stories or general information about a case or a situation that you've experienced in your past that gives you hope and keeps you working in the field? Anyone can start.
Sure, I'll start. We get this question all the time in this work. I'm sure everyone can attest to it. And people ask, how do you do it? It must be so hard. It must be so depressing. But to LaToya's point, what we see every day when you work with survivors is you see the end result of all the effort, all the collaboration between all the agencies. And I'll quickly share a story. On our Youth Resource Center side, we had a teen girl that came in a couple of years ago and just had textbook risk factors. So living with a grandmother, had experienced childhood sexual abuse, poverty was an issue in her environment. She came to our Youth Resource Center. We helped her stay connected, made sure she was completing her homework. She had aspirations to go to college. Well, in the middle of the pandemic, she graduated last May as valedictorian of her high school class. Not only that, she is now enrolled in a university to become an attorney, of all things. And so we have story upon story that's just like that, where someone just needed guardrails and someone to say, this is how you can overcome, this is how you can make a difference and change your life, take control and restore and empower your own life. And quickly on the adult side, we are seeing that a lot of our women are coming through with criminal records because, as you know, if you're involved in trafficking and then you're committing prostitution, which is a crime, so you're both victim and perpetrator. So they come to us and they have criminal records on their background. And it doesn't matter how much counseling we provide, how much basic needs we provide for them. If she can't get a job, if she can't get an apartment, if she can't sustain herself, then what was the point of it all, right? And so we've partnered with attorneys and agencies that are helping us, and the state level, that are helping us to create, to expunge records of women who are trafficking survivors. And there's nothing like when they get that call that says, what happened is a part of your history, what you were stuck in at no will of your own, that's no longer going to be held against you. So we get calls like that all the time, and it just reassures and inspires us to keep going.
Both of those are absolutely beautiful stories, and I love it. I love it. I love it because there is hope on the other side. Anyone else have a success story they'd like to share?
We do. So real quick to Bianca's point, I worked with someone as a colleague in the field who had been a trafficking survivor, and she not only had her record expunged, but she is working for Girl Scouts of all places and going into the juvenile detention centers and teaching trafficking outreach, trafficking 101, what to look for, and working with girls that are survivors. And so she inspires me greatly. But as far as RST is concerned, we have a client, we had a client until recently. His name is Ben, and originally he's from the Philippines. He was trafficked originally back in Missouri in the hotel industry, was transferred around to some different states. His most recent trafficking situation was for 7 years. He ended up in Texas, and he was able to escape from his trafficker. He won his case against his trafficker, which is huge. That takes a lot of courage. He got his green card, and the same year that he won his case, he started volunteering with us. So now he's participated in speaking engagements, including with the First Lady of Texas, Mrs. Abbott. He's also been featured in major TV news, radio, newspapers. He's finishing his degree in May on a scholarship, and he's researching how to prevent labor trafficking and reduce vulnerabilities and how the community responds to human trafficking. And he'll be presenting his final recommendations to the human trafficking headquarters in DC. And if I can offer just a little bit of a pitch, Ben is going to be speaking on March 4th at an event that we have going on. It's all on our website, rstx.org. It's a free event to the community. We'll have an in-person component at a drive-in theater in Austin, but we'll be showing the film called This Is Not My Life. I don't know if you're all are familiar with it, but it talks about trafficking. It's an hour long. It talks about domestic and international trafficking, sex and labor trafficking. So it really gives a good idea of the clientele that we serve and the diversity of those circumstances. And then we'll have Ben talk and share his experience, and we'll also be live streaming an interview from Nepal from a survivor that I worked with in the red light districts in India. So she'll be talking about not just her experience, but her activism. Both of them were focusing on the activism part and what a contribution they've made and how they've transformed their experience into this incredible just way of helping others avoid similar situations. So I'll go ahead and put that in the chat too.
Well, March 4th, we will all be tuning in to celebrate Ben and the great work that he's doing, because that's, again, there's life on the other side. And I love that they are both serving as activists now to prevent it from happening to others, to spread the information about how to prevent trafficking and to set the story straight about what trafficking looks like and who could be a trafficking victim.
Thank you.
If I could share. So
Please.
One of the greatest privileges and honors that I think that I share, and I'm sure my colleagues feel the same, is being able to work with the survivor advocates, folks who have experiential knowledge of this horrible crime, but with their resiliency, their strength, and in the healing process, they're able to come out, as you said, on the other side and do amazing work for those who are still in the situation. I think I have had the privilege of working with two survivor advocates, Yuri and Ingrid Guerrero, and I share their names because they have shared their name publicly and they've come out as survivor advocates. But Yuri and Ingrid have done amazing work. Their trafficking experience was especially terrible one, but for them to be able to where they are now, and the encouragement that they have in doing what they do is amazing to me. One of them is now a real estate agent and will be practicing soon. We're very happy for the work that she is doing. And Ingrid is in a doctorate program for biomedical engineering. I mean, just amazing. They are sisters. They are amazing survivor advocates. And they've always made it a point to say the reason we're doing this is for all of those who are still in this situation now. So I just want to point that out, and how survivors, just the resiliency that they have. is breathtaking, and just really honored to be able to work with them.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And let's not get just, a regular degree. Let's get like, did you say biochemical engineering? Like what?
Biomedical engineering.
Oh, biomedical. Yes. That lets
Yeah.
us know how brilliant this individual was, and they were still able to become susceptible and become a victim of human trafficking. And the beautiful part is they are not staying in the victimization role. They are taking back their strength and they are showing the world their greatness. And so I appreciate you all sharing those awesome, awesome success stories. That makes my heart smile. There are some questions that have come into the chat box, and I just wanted to, since we have a little bit of extra time, I wanted to bring up a couple of them. One was very specific, and it asked, are DFW traffickers mostly connected to organized crime, um, like just in the US or just in Texas or across the border? Or is it more like local brothels and fake massage parlors? Like, how is it? What establishments are most prevalent here in the DFW area for trafficking?
But Latoya, great question, and I will say that trafficking is an international business, uh, in every part of the world, because of the transportation industry, because of the World Wide Web. Victims can be recruited and brought over at a moment's notice. And so what we're seeing in a lot, we reached out on a national level, that we see a lot of the connections to the or criminal organizations overseas in an international level, but we also see a national system of organizations that are connected, from different parts of the United States, and they routinely rotate victims from area to area. So I mean, it is a mixture of what we are seeing, but I mean, it is because of the world we live in, and instant news, instant media, instant messaging. It is truly an international business.
If I could add to that, I think we said it in the beginning that human trafficking is a very complex issue. And whenever we think about where it's happening or who it's happening to, we take into account that human trafficking is involved in many industries, right? So depending on what industry you're talking about, you're going to have a different set of parameters and dynamics that kind of run that world. So when you do have these let's say group led type of trafficking, you're going to see a more organized type of dynamic there. But you also have these opportunistic type of traffickers that just see a person in need and they take advantage of that situation, right? And this happens in both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. If we think about labor trafficking, there are some groups that involve the farm owner, the farm labor contractor, and then the person providing all that transportation. You're talking about a group of folks who are teaming up to exploit all these vulnerable persons. But then again, you can also have just a farm labor contractor taking advantage of that situation, right? Even whenever we think about sex trafficking, let's use an area here in the North Dallas area that's known for commercial sex. We think about the different industries involved there, right? If we think about the Harry Hines area that's highly known as a sex, we think about the different industries involved there. On the main strip, you have the dynamic of the more traditional form of quote unquote prostitution that we think of when we think of that. There you have a lot of opportunistic or maybe even group type of mindset whenever traffickers are exploiting victims there. But in that same area, you have illicit massage businesses. And in those illicit massage businesses, you have an entirely different dynamic, right? The age range within those illicit massage businesses are from early 20s all the way up to 50, mid 50s, right? So even there, you have folks who are again, have a different set of characteristics and are being exerted upon different types of manipulation and coercion, right? So all that to say is that human trafficking is very complex, and that's what is great about the work that we're all doing, because we are tending to do it together a lot more often these days.
That's the beautiful part. We are now able to work together. And working together includes the average resident, the average citizen. And so one of the questions that was brought up is you all gave some tips and pointers on what to look for, but the question that came through was, is there a sign or an indicator that someone should immediately contact law enforcement either through the non-emergency number or the 911 to get help?
I will say this: if you suspect something, you should say something, because it's always better to be on the safe side and get it cleared up, and then not report something and find out that something is actually going home in your neighborhood. And I just want to take a second to expand on what Noel said. I mean, we had a very successful case where a neighbor happened to notice that there was a lot of men going in and out of a residential home in a neighborhood. And so an investigation started, and the outcome was that there were two individuals that were recruiting masseuses back in Taiwan to come over. And once they got here, they were not becoming masseuses, they were actually involved in sex trafficking. And so just because of the neighbor's foresight to see something and report it, we were able to basically rescue victims and prosecute the perpetrators of the crime.
And conversely, oh, sorry, I was going to say, Noel, I know the survivors that you're talking about. I met them with you actually, and I forget how many years they were trafficked, but they were in a residential setting too, and nobody noticed, right? And so I'm sure that there were those red flags that just got overlooked, and no one thought anything of it, or if they did, they didn't say anything, right? So I definitely would echo Brad and say, just be on the safe side.
So there we have it, friends. If you see something and you notice that something's not right, please feel free to contact local law enforcement or call one of the national hotlines or tip lines. We also have great nonprofit partners, such as those represented today, that you can reach out to, not only for volunteer opportunities and to help, but also to alert them if there's something going on that you believe is suspicious, so that they can work with the authorities to not only rescue the victims, but make sure that we prosecute those people who are inflicting damage and harm upon these people. I want to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed my time today. I am almost sad that this hour is coming to an end, but I thank you so very much for all that you've been able to share and how we've grown and how much we've learned. I appreciate your time, your participation. I thank you for the work that you do. I am so thrilled to know that there are awesome success stories, and I can't wait for us to all work together and have more success stories in the future. Thank you to the panelists for their participation. Thank you to the attendees for spending time with us today. I want to remind everyone that there are resources that are available in the chat, and we will contact you also if we have your email to send other information to you as well. We thank you for spending this time with us today, and we sincerely hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Thank you again to my panelists. Y'all are absolutely awesome.
Thank you so much.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for having us. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.